Hi, this is Phil Cooke, and welcome to the Phil Cooke Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Steve Robinson, pastor of Church of the King in New Orleans. Now, Steve has written a remarkable book. It's called Soul Leadership: Rebound from Crisis, Grow in Resilience, Live from Wholeness. It's a terrific, terrific book. He's been working on this for years because it kind of tells his story as well. And I'll tell you, every leader that's struggling with something internal, something mental, something really anything you're struggling with, this book is going to provide some real serious answers. And I found out years ago from working with churches and ministry organizations in crisis, those crisis situations usually started very small. And that's the time to put it into it. That's the time to deal with it. So this book is a huge step forward. So I'm excited that Steve's on the program today. And let's go to the interview. Steve Robinson, I'm thrilled that you are here. We've been friends for a long time, and I've wanted to talk about soul leadership since the book came out. And so this is a great opportunity. So thanks for being on.
Well, Phil, again, as you've said, I've known you for a long time, and we're grateful for the years of friendship, partnership, coaching, and criticism. You would tweak, your lighting's wrong. I'm like, Phil, I'm just trying to preach the word, man. But you've been a dear friend, and thank you. I'm excited. You've actually been one of the encouragers in my life to write, get things in print. So, man, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Big time.
Well, I cannot deny my spiritual gift of criticism, so I have to unleash from time to time, just for the record. But we're talking about soul leadership, your new book. And the thing I like about it is, there's a million books on leadership. Our mutual friend, John Maxwell, other guys have just done an amazing work in that area. However, there's niches, as our British friends say, that we have not addressed. And I think your book is really unique in that area where you deal with trauma, you deal with the inner workings, if you will, the mental health issues of leadership. And so I just think it's the only thing on the market at any great level that I've ever seen that deals with this kind of subject. Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, so the book is really an intersection of three lanes in my life, one of which is I've been a pastor. I'm 57. I've been a pastor for 27 years and just working with people. And it's almost like they come to this moment, and I work with a lot of leaders as well, where it's just like they reach this zenith, this point. It's like, and then you see their lives blow up and you're like, What is that? What? So kind of you do the archaeological dig and you see kind of similarities in the pathway and decisions and some of the pain that they had as young kids, unresolved trauma, guilt, pain. Number two, Phil, quite honestly, my story. In 2010, February 2010, I went to go preach in my pulpit, Church of the King, and shaky. And I literally had these thoughts going through my mind. This is it. This is when people lose it. Like you have a mental breakdown. I had a breakdown, a nervous breakdown, which is a breakdown in your nervous system. It sounds a little bit cooler to say burnout, brownout. Bottom line is it's a nervous breakdown. Your nervous system is overwhelmed by the complexities of life, by the stressors of life. So my own personal journey. And then number three, 2019 to 2022, I did 3 years of doctoral work. I got my doctorate in ministry, and I focused on, because of the passion in my life to help leaders, I focused for 3 years, Phil, on trauma and leadership and the intersection of the two. And so I was speaking at the Bible Museum, and again, our friend John Maxwell, afterwards, he said, Steve, you got to put this in a book. So really, soul leadership, in essence, is my doctoral dissertation reformatted in a popular leadership book. The principles in it apply to anybody, but so it's my story working with people in my study for those 3 years, and it was fascinating what the information I gained.
How often do you find leaders who think, oh, I'm okay, I'm good, I don't have trauma in my life, I don't have a struggle, but if you dig down deep enough, something's going on there?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because really the term integration is big for me. The book is it's an integration of theology, therapy, neuroscience, leadership, and my own story. You'll talk to leaders and they're like, hey, you know what, I just need to take off, I'm a little bit tired. Being tired, when you're tired, you take a nap. When you're traumatized and your brain has actually been restructured by constant pressure and stress, guess what? There's a different pathway to recovery. I think awareness is so huge for leaders. They really don't know how to identify what's going on. Matter of fact, it's interesting you said that. The first whole section of the book is, here it is, what's going on with me?
Yeah.
And so my goal is to really help leaders become aware of trauma in the brain, what's going on. That's the neuroscience, that's the psychology, that's the therapy piece that I think is so interesting. So I think, Phil, I hear it all the time. You write about it. You write about the good, the bad, and the ugly of leaders, where it's like, man, what happened? And how many times have you heard a leader say, you know what, if I knew now what I known then,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have made those decisions. I wouldn't have put myself in that, I wouldn't have exposed myself to those, those poor choices and all those different stuff. So awareness is key in this whole journey, Phil.
Now, I remember that during Hurricane Katrina, when it hit New Orleans, you were one of the key leaders in that recovery because you're pastoring one of the largest churches in the region. And it was just natural for you to step into that. How did that impact what you're writing about here? Because that was a horrific experience to go through.
It's interesting. I had some childhood pain, just like a lot of people. I think maybe a little bit unique with alcoholic dad and a stepfather's an alcoholic, but I felt like I'd kind of gained some healing through that, and Bible school and seminary and training. And so when our church started when I was 30 years old, I can honestly say for the first 6 years, I felt like, just like there's a wind behind us, man. It was exciting. There was a fire. It actually grew from 19 adults to 3,200 people on the weekend in the building. And then Hurricane Katrina happened. And as you noted, when Hurricane Katrina happened, you go into leadership mode, which is really, here it is. It's really adrenaline mode. And, I never really thought about myself, our family. I made sure that they were safe. And I just threw myself into relief, recovery, rebuilding, revitalization. And I can honestly say for 1 year, I slept very little, threw myself into it, and lived off of adrenaline. All that cortisol and that adrenaline gets pushed into your system because you're ramped up, you're activated. And from there, really what happened was 2006, 2005 was a storm for a whole year, 2006, 2007. We lost half of our church, Phil, but then we gained and grew back. And so then we started this big building campaign. And then we had this little recession called the Great Recession. So what I realized, Phil, in my life, and this is all, I speak about this in soul leadership, is that, trauma is unique. Some people think trauma is just like you go to, you see somebody murdered, or you experience a sexual assault, which is so painful, or you go through a hurricane. These are big things. But trauma also can become cumulative. It's a board challenge.
Yes.
It's a challenge with a kid who's on drugs. It's a marriage challenge. It's a social media issue in the community as a pastor, and you're trying to navigate all that. So my breakdown in 2010 was really, Phil, 5 years of cumulative trauma. I didn't know that then. I know that now after years of counseling and walking with therapists and studying. And what happens about the brain, if I can just share for a moment, there's 3 parts of the brain that are so critical to understanding stress, trauma, crisis, and adversity. Number 1 is your what's called prefrontal cortex. That's your thinking brain. And then what you would have here is you have what's called your limbic system, which is your emotional brain. And then you've got your brain stem, which kind of deals with your heart rate and all the circulatory issues in your body and breathing and whatnot. And so what happens when you go in trauma, when you experience trauma is not the event itself. It's actually what happens in your brain and your body because of the event and or events. And this is huge. Why? 2 people can go through the same thing, but one can be less traumatized than the other. The issue is we carry the impact in our brain and our body after the event, after the events. And that's why what's going on, so much of the pain we have in our souls today and in our bodies today, we carry it in our body. Often it's because of something that's happened, it's unresolved years ago. So what happened to me was trauma had such an impact in my brain and in my body. That's when my nervous system basically just shut down. So it's interesting what happens with the brain through trauma and impact and stress. Big time.
Now, as you know, being a pastor, most pastors are under enormous pressure not to reveal this kind of stress they're going under, not to tell anybody, not to let anybody know because they don't want to lose face with their congregation or lose the respect of their congregation. How should a pastor respond to this? When, people listening right now, I've got a ton of pastors and ministry leaders that listen to this podcast, people that are listening that are going through something that this is clicking with them. What would you tell them to do?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because to me, the book is actually divided in a pre-trauma plan, pre-crisis plan, and a post-crisis. So pre-crisis is really about building resilience. And so the soul leadership cycle, I'm kind of breaking it down here: trauma triggers and terrible habits, the resilience cycle, and then post-traumatic growth. When you're building resilience, what does that mean? To strengthen your soul, to strengthen your body, to strengthen your emotional life. The number one predictor, Phil, of people that make it through crisis, stress, and adversity is their social network. Safe relationships. Yeah, I've got a predictive index in that book. You'll see all that, where they can predict. You show me your friends of safe friends and your ability to navigate through that. And so here's the critical thing. I live in the Gulf Coast, and as you mentioned, a hurricane, it's hurricane season. So that activates people a little bit. You get in June, July, August, September. So here's the deal. You don't wait until the hurricane is coming up the Gulf of Mexico for you to prepare. You prepare now, knowing that in life, the hurricane would be symbolic of a crisis. Jesus said it this way: in this world, now I'm going to reinterpret it, you're going to experience trouble. Let me put the word in there: crisis. The question is this: do you have enough supply on board to navigate that? You used to live in Los Angeles. I'm not sure where you live. You just kind of go wherever the Spirit leads now.
There you go. That's it's being a prophet. That's what happens.
It's your prophetic writer, whatever. But if I was in Dallas yesterday. Okay. I live in Louisiana. If there's a huge storm on the border, there's got to be enough fuel in that airplane to reroute to go up to Memphis and come back down. Here's the point. So many pastors and leaders, they don't have enough fuel on board to be able to navigate that crisis. And so instead, they crash in the storm. Relationships, don't wait, Pastor. So what I would say is, we need to break the silence if we're hurting, but we need to build healthy relationships before we're hurting. So that's the key to that sustainability.
Now, your comment about social networks being the number one way they weather the storm, that, just for the clarification, that's not social media followers.
No.
That's actual people you're in relationship, right?
That's right. No, that's people. It's interesting. When I began to think about this whole thing of the brain, and it was fascinating, Phil, in my study with the brain. And if I can just go there just for a moment, because I'm going to get back into relationships. So the book, Soul Leadership. What is soul leadership? Proverbs 4:23, watch over your heart, for out of it springs the issues of life. It's being aware of what's happening on the inside. The word there, heart, is your inner self. So I'm aware of my emotions. I'm aware of my thoughts, my internal reasonings, my spiritual life. But I'm also aware of something else. I'm aware of my brain-body connection. This is huge. The brain is a physical organ. The mind, this is important. The brain and the mind are similar, but they're different. The brain is a physical organ. Here's what it's called. Here it is. Ready? Corporeal. It has matter. The mind, or the soul, is called incorporeal. It's without matter. But they're so connected together, it's almost like a duplex sharing the same front door. Both of them are neuroplastic. What does that mean? The brain is neuroplastic. It changes. It's not fixed. Yeah. That's why Paul said it this way: be transformed by the what? The renewing of the mind. Yeah. So you rewire your brain, but you renew the mind. And it transforms. It's malleable, right? So we want to put truth in there. So why is this important? Let me go back to your brain, how it's structured again, and get back to trauma, because I'm going to talk about relationships. So the front of your brain, your thinking brain, feeling brain, and then your brain stem back here. When you go through extreme trauma, this is where pastors, they don't get it. They think, well, I feel spiritually dry. Maybe, but it could be that you're experiencing trauma. Trauma is a brain injury. Now, it can be healed and you can process that, and it can come back into what's called homeostasis. But it's not a prayer issue. It's a physical issue. This is big for pastors. And because, our tradition, our evangelical tradition, we get scared of science. We get scared of this. No.
Yeah.
God created it, right? So here's the point. The point is this. When you go through crisis, repeated crisis over and over and over, and your brain, PTSD, post-traumatic stress, right? Post-traumatic stress syndrome. Your brain actually restructures. It doesn't separate, it restructures. And what do I mean by that? The thinking brain, which should lead the brain, you should respond thoughtfully in life, but instead, a traumatized person, you know what they do? They react emotionally. They don't respond thoughtfully. So here's what happens. Your amygdala is that emotional brain in your limbic system. It fires off. You're quickly activated, hypervigilant, scanning for danger. Somebody commits a misdemeanor in a relationship and you respond with a felony. These are the symptoms that I have in the book. I have the symptomology in the book, the DSM-5, which counselors, I'm not a counselor, by the way. I'm trauma-informed, but I'm not a counselor. I'm a pastor, I'm a practitioner, I'm a leader. So the brain, here's what I didn't get. It wasn't just that I was spiritually hurting. My brain needed healing.
Yeah.
When you have a nervous breakdown, it's not just a spiritual issue, incorporeal. It's a corporeal issue. It's a brain matter issue. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So in that equation, being under constant stress, what role does taking time off, getting away from the stress, what role does that play in a leader's life?
Yeah. So what I talked about in the bucket 2, the resilience equation, is I talked about the 5 things that we do to build resilience. What resilience is your ability to absorb crisis and respond back. I talked about 5 things: relationships. I talked about physical health. Oh my gosh, this is huge. I know as Christians, we don't like to talk about this, but I talked about in the book, exercise. I talked about nutrition, sleep, the great cognitive reset. What that does is it actually replenishes serotonin in your brain. It makes you feel good. Your happy hormone. So I talk about relationships. I talk about physical health. Of course, spiritual health through prayer, Bible reading, being connected to Jesus. I'm a Christian. I believe in that. And then I also talk about mental health. And I talked about the wiring of the brain through biblical meditation. So often we think that meditation is emptying the mind. Actually, biblical meditation is filling the mind through speaking it over your life, the truth. And then I talked about emotional health. Here's the thing, Phil. Most leaders overserve and undernourish their souls in the area of their emotions. And it's hard. The hardest energy to replace is emotional energy. So I talk about Sabbath and silence, and I talk about the spiritual formation habits. And so those 5 practices, and what do? They build capacity, they build resilience. My dissertation was actually mitigating the impact of psychological trauma. How do you mitigate it? By building resilience in your life. So there's 5 practices, and anybody can do it.
It's interesting that before we started recording, we were talking about a blog post I just did on Winston Churchill's home, Chartwell, in the UK. And it was interesting to me that he had a painting studio. So here's a guy that was trying to rally the UK to war against Hitler. I mean, kind of a busy guy. And yet he took the time off. He liked to paint. He liked to lay bricks. It was odd. He loved to lay bricks. But even he knew in the most serious battle he was fighting against the Nazis, you had to take time off. And he did it and did it brilliantly. I think it's a great illustration.
Yeah, it's funny. In the book, I talk about playing golf by myself. A mutual friend of ours who you connected with me with Pastor Jack Graham.
Yeah.
He was reading the book. He goes, Steve, I didn't know you played golf because you got to come play golf with me. I said, well, I do. And I said, matter of fact, I said, Pastor, and of course I look up to him. He's such a mentor to so many of us. And I said, Pastor, I like to play by myself, but I do play with people sometimes. And here's why. I think it's important that we have hobbies outside of our professional life to have a mental reset and an emotional reset. When I went to Chartwell House, actually last summer, I saw that. And he was a prolific painter, wasn't he? It was just amazing. I mean, Winston Churchill. So, and here's the thing, Phil. It's interesting, going back to the soul leadership cycle, trauma, triggers, and terrible habits, and the resilience equation. I'm going to back up just for a moment. I looked at a couple people in my book about who were triggered, activated, and I took some risks. One of them was Saul, who's always perceived as disfavorably. You know, we kind of look down on Saul. You know,
Yeah.
he ended up bad. He kind of started good, but ended bad. But I took a shot at it, and I really felt biblically, as you guys, whoever gets the book, you'll see, I looked at Moses, and here's why. Moses, here's somebody, you talk about unprocessed pain and trauma. And this is important because I believe so many leaders are hearing this, that Moses, he's born with separation. He's born as an orphan. Think about that. His mom was a part of a little bit in there in the Pharaoh's house, but you talk about somebody who grew up Hebrew, but struggled with the fact that he was raised in an Egyptian household, right?
Yeah.
And then we see him kill the Egyptian, then he flees and all this. And then he lives for what? Constant accusation. Let me tell you something. With social media, you mentioned, what that does to your brain, the stress. Somebody asked me recently, they said, they show me a tape. They show me a tape from me 27 years ago. I said, Pastor, I've got one of your early tapes. And I said, burn it. Don't listen to it. My voice was screechy. But well, here's the thing. Our technology today is a blessing, but it's also a challenge. Think about Moses, lived under constant accusation, constant evaluation. That's how pastors feel today. Real time. I mean, somebody is on Facebook while you're preaching, right? Or on Instagram making comments while you're preaching. So he goes through all of this, Phil. Then he gets to a moment in Numbers chapter 20. And I write about this. He doesn't process the death of his sister Miriam. He's under constant evaluation, constant criticism. And you know what? He's triggered. God tells him to go what? Go what? Speak to the rock.
Yep.
This is the second time. And what does he do? He hits the rock. And God said, because you didn't hollow me in your eyes, my eyes, guess what? I'm going to let you go up on Mount Nebo. You're going to look at the promised land, but you're not going to bring him in. What's the point? We call it dysregulated. We call it getting in the flesh, whatever you want to call it. Here's the bottom line. Because he had unprocessed pain, it cost his influence. Now, I know that's Moses. That's risky saying that. He's the holiest man, the most powerful man. I mean,
right.
But yet, why did God leave it? God left it to us as an example. If Moses needed to process pain so he didn't, quote, get dysregulated and limit his influence, here's what I realize. Calm leaders produce calm organizations. Calm parents, we have what's called mirror neurons. Phil, if I yawned right now, you would yawn within 1 minute.
Yeah.
People reflect our leadership. And so I appeal to leaders all throughout the book. Guys, we're impacting people more than we realize for the good. And yes, unfortunately, for the bad. So that's the trauma, triggers, and terrible habits. I talk about why leaders cope with pain. And you and I have a friend of mine, a mutual guy that we both know, and I don't know him well, but I was with him a number of years ago, an incredible leader in the body of Christ. And I saw him. He was medicating his pain. I knew it, and I know the backstory. And that's what's called a negative coping pathology. Why do people do that? I'll tell you why. It's not rocket science. They're trying to numb the pain. And so that's all that first part of the book, and then resilience building. So there's so much in there. I know I'm downloading a lot, man. I just want to help leaders.
No, it's fantastic. And I think, dealing with crisis situations like I've done, when I sit down with the guy later or the woman and later and say, look, looking back, where did all this, let's look at where this started. It's always with very small things that we don't take seriously. Yeah. And you talk about that over and over in the book that, it's little things that build up, and we can't handle anymore. You use the word in the book, resilient, a lot, having resilience. And I just think that's a fantastic word because it's so true. Being able to condition your life so that you can withstand, and these things are going to happen. We live in this digital, distracted culture. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse.
Well, we can have wisdom. I call it employing wisdom strategies. And here's the thing. Jesus said it's going to happen. Trouble's going to come. Crisis is going to come. But when it comes, do we have, I keep using that analogy, enough fuel on board to reroute a little bit?
That's good.
Got to have enough fuel on board to go up to Memphis, back down to New Orleans. If not, you're going to crash. And so relationships, mental and emotional health, physical health, spiritual health. I talk about writing down, having a gratitude journal. It's interesting. Romans 1 talks about one of the characteristics of a society in declension is ingratitude.
Wow.
And I talk about the lighting up of our brain where our amygdala is actually quieted down and our prefrontal cortex goes online through gratitude. I show the science behind that, the importance of daily gratitude, thanking God. Doesn't the Bible talk about it? Be thankful, be grateful, and how it affects your mental health and your brain every day. And so all of this, as you said so well, all of this is about building capacity. It's about getting enough fuel on board to absorb crisis and to be able to respond back. So here's the thing. So you look at somebody like me, you go, Steve, I had some bumps and bruises growing up. I got saved in college at 19 at Tulane University. And then as a leader, my gosh, I went through Hurricane Katrina and oil spills and great recessions and building campaigns, and I have a breakdown. And I'm like, God, what is all this? Again, sometimes, and I admit sometimes things are outside of our control, but sometimes we create stress in our own lives by our poor decisions. Nonetheless, hope for the Christian is that God can use whatever we go through somehow redemptively. So I stumbled upon this term in my studies on trauma in the brain. And here it is, Phil, post-traumatic growth. It's a new field the last 20 years or so. I have a lot of studies in the book. Post-traumatic growth says this. It says that when you go through something and you properly process with safe people and go through healing in the brain and in the body, okay?
Yeah.
You actually can emerge stronger. Years ago, my daughter broke her, my daughter, Isabel, she broke her arm. And Phil, I was talking to the orthopedic surgeon and I just fascinated. I said, tell me, doctor, how? He goes, well, temporarily, there's extra calcium that goes to that break and it's injected there. Watch this. And then, so it gets a little bit stronger temporarily. Then it goes back to baseline. So that's physical trauma. Psychological trauma is similar, but there's a major difference. If you properly process pain and trauma, you don't return back to baseline. You actually can go beyond previous functioning. So in other words, you become a better human being, more empathetic, more wise as a person. You become a more compassionate leader. Your emotional intelligence. I've got all the graphs. I got all the science. I got all the data. I got all the social psychology, analytical tools in there to show workplace performance of CEOs that properly process pain and how they become incredibly gifted and well-versed in emotional intelligence skills. How? Through when pain is properly processed, it becomes purposeful. So that's post-traumatic growth. Isn't that cool? That's redemption. That's redemptive.
Oh, yeah. And it's one of the reasons I like this book so much, that there's real hope out there. And the truth is, every leader, if he's honest with himself or she's honest with herself, is struggling with these kind of things. At some level, somewhere along the journey, they're out there struggling with these things. And that's why I just recommend the book so much. It's fantastic. So tell me this. Tell me more about Steve Robinson. Where do we find out more about you? How do we find out more about the book? Where should we go? What's the website? Where should we go?
Steve, my website is steverobinson.com. Of course, you can buy the book anywhere. You can go right on Amazon if you want. You buy it off our website as well. But I'd like to share one more thing about the book, if I can do that. I was getting ready to turn my dissertation in, and Dr. Jim V. Hill, Southeastern University, said, Steve, he goes, I love the book. He goes, I love your dissertation, but you're missing one part. I said, what is that? He goes, I want you to, now I've got to do my oral defense. I'm like, and he goes, it lacks the cross. And I said, what? And so he goes, I want you to go deeper in the cross. So he gave me 30 days, or I was going to have to graduate 8 months later. That would have been May, so the following December. I said, Dr. V, I can't do that. So I went back and the Lord began to show me something, Phil, and I dove into this. I was an evangelist. I preached the blood of Christ. I preached the blood of Christ. He was wounded for our transgressions. That's our, violation of God's moral law. Bruised for our iniquities. That's our bentness towards sin. I know all that. But here's what it is. I went into the cross and the Lord showed me. He carried away our sorrows. The word carried is sabal. The word sorrows is makab. And here's what it means. That's the Hebrew word, makab. It means mental pain and anguish. And then I realized something.
Wow.
So the cross doesn't just forgive your sin. Remember your soul side. But the cross also goes to the core of healing your psychological trauma, your mental pain. And I thought, how does God do that? as we receive Christ, one of the practical ways he does that is in the presence of God when we worship. You know how many times people have come in the church? I talked to this lady one time. I said, hey, where are you during the singing part? She goes, Pastor, I can't do the singing part. I listen to your talks. I like your talks. But the singing, it's just too much. I said, why? She goes, I cry. And I said, why are you crying? I said, it's not because we're playing Old Yellow reruns up here. Everybody, you cried during Old Yellow reruns.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I said, let me tell you why you're crying. You're sensing God's presence. Trauma therapists will say this. You can't get healed by just talking, but your limbic system has to be unlocked. And this is all in my book. You know what's happening during worship? I believe the Holy Spirit's unlocking your limbic system. He's going to the core of where that pain has been stored. Your hippocampus is where those memories are. He doesn't erase the memory, but what he does is he heals the pain attached to the memory.
Whoa.
The presence of God is God's healing agency for the traumatized person. Spend a lot of time in God's presence. I'm telling you, it is a healing, restorative agency for the traumatized soul. So that's a piece that I just have at the end of the book that's so powerful. So steverobinson.com and man, anywhere I can help folks. We got a lot of materials on there, and thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
I hope this has been helpful.
No, and the thing is, we've only covered about 1% of the book. So
we got a lot in here, man.
I need to have you come back, and I just encourage people to get it because it's so important. Yeah. It's so unique and different from anything that's out there. And I'm just thrilled. So thank you for your friendship. Thanks for doing the book. We should do this again. We actually have some fun here.
I'd love to do that. Phil, thank you. Thank you for all that you've done for us, for our church, how you've coached us, counseled us, helped us, and all you do in the body of Christ. It means a lot, and you're a dear friend. Thank you so much.
You're very kind. Thank you. Well, I'm incredibly grateful to Steve. He's been a friend for a long time and done some remarkable things at Church of the King in New Orleans. He's actually on the north side of Lake Pontchartrain in Mandeville, Louisiana, and it's just an amazing church. They've done some remarkable things, and they're just opening a new campus downtown New Orleans, so they're doing remarkable things. And this book, as I said in the interview, is a niche. It's a unique area that I've not seen before in the leadership genre of books. And I think that it's a great book to have in your library, and you definitely should get it. John Maxwell did the foreword, and it's a terrific, terrific book. So I encourage you to get it. And thanks to Steve for the interview. Maybe I'll have him come back and talk about certain sections of the book, because this goes on and on and on. There's so many amazing things that are in this book that you need to know. So remember, and stay tuned for our next episode. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts or YouTube, wherever it is. And I appreciate you being a part of what we're doing. And philcooke.com is the hub. Go there to find my blogs and books and everything else you want to know. And I'll see you next time.